pieces, they just go in the kiln raw, no glaze, no slip, nothing on it. It's just an interaction between the raw clay and the wood ash. So on a piece like this, if you look really closely, there's some purple tones, some black, as you can see, and that just happens from the nature of the firing. For me, the rubble is just like a material aspect of clay. Really what I'm looking for is how can I make the clay look the most like clay. So to me, this is rough, it's torn, it's unrefined, which is what clay is, and combine that with the very raw atmosphere of a wood kiln, and I get what clay can be in its pure clay-ish state. And I always start with a piece of rubble or some other piece that's been atmospherically fired. I find that that's a good place for me to start. So when I'm planning my pieces, I don't really plan from the start. What goes on the left, what goes on the right, and how things react. I really think about how can I make a piece that'll partner with this chunk of clay in a way that becomes interesting to the viewer and makes them wonder why I did that. Just trying to think about what would accent this piece well. So this part juts out, so I want another piece to slide in underneath it. Maybe if it sticks out that way, or I guess for me that'd be out to my right, I'll make a piece that sticks out to the left a little bit. I'm really trying to think about what will contrast each other. Contrast is really important to me in my work. I like to compare two things that don't make sense together. Round pieces with geometric pieces that are very rigid, or very organic, kind of natural clay looking pieces with something that's obviously thought through and refined. There's nothing really fancy about my making process. I really just utilize slab building, the same techniques you'd learn in any intro ceramics hand building class. I always loved art, even as a kid. In high school, I was lucky enough to take a ceramics class because our high school happened to have a ceramics teacher, and that really set me on the path or the way of clay, and really started my foundation as a ceramic artist. In undergrad, I studied art education, but quickly found that though I enjoyed teaching, I really loved clay too and couldn't give it up, and eventually decided to get my master's in ceramics. Early on, when I was first learning how to work with clay, I just felt this need to work with functional objects, but I still was interested in contrast, much like I am now. And as a grad student, I eventually came to realize that function wasn't important to me, but the relationship between pieces and surface and form. And it was a big struggle for me early on in grad school to give up working with function, because I'd always done that and it put me in a really uncomfortable place, but I eventually got through that, and I'm happy with how my work came out. And now I feel more comfortable and feel like I can actually make the work I've always wanted to make. But one thing that is kind of interesting that people don't see often is decals, which are something I work with more recently. I've been using them more and more. Like this pattern here. So it's like a nice blue and white poppy pattern. And it fires on, it doesn't move, it looks just like that. So I like to use these if I want something that seems a little more gaudy, a little more weird. But I think it works really well because I like to play around with the different effects, or rather than effects, different surfaces that ceramics can provide. So I have these really rough wood fire piece, so what's the complete opposite I can think of a rough, raw piece of clay that's been wood fired? Well, I used to do something similar, like, oh, it's a white cube, like this. Well, I can get that pushed even farther, and a white cube is probably pretty much the opposite, but it's still clay, it's still ceramic. But what if this was covered with a wallpaper print? So here's a piece of porcelain rubble, and it's sitting next to that decal piece. Very different surfaces. You have one side we have our wood-fired surface that has nothing paid attention to except for one section of glaze right here to kind of accent the blue, and then very intense bright colors that come from working with decals. Kind of reminds me of, it's almost like this is what it starts out as and this is what they turned it into. Looks like grandma's bathroom wall to me. you.